Hi there, this is Linda from Let's Talk Prepping, and I was looking for photos for my videos, and I came across these World War I, World War II, and Great Depression photos. It made me think of the parallels between then and now, and how history repeats itself. So let's look at the parallels, but first be sure to subscribe and comment on how the future repeats the past. As you look at these pictures and posters, you will see how today's pandemic economy has many parallels with the past. The first thing that was really important back then was the Victory Garden, and we will need to grow our own food to survive. For the average American in World War II, the Victory Garden was a practical way to contribute to the war effort. Some 20 million Victory Gardens were planted, from suburban backyards to small city plots of land. And by 1943, these small gardens produced 40% of all vegetables consumed in the U.S. It's estimated that 9 to 10 million tons of vegetables were grown. Then there was one Victory Garden for every 7 people. They were necessary since food rationing was in effect domestically to support overseas troops. Trains and trucks had to be used to transport soldiers, vehicles, and weapons. Most Americans ate local produce grown in their own communities. People with no yards planted small Victory Gardens in window boxes and watered them through their windows. Some city dwellers who lived in tall apartment buildings planted rooftop gardens, and the whole building pitched in and helped. They were used along with rationing stamps and cards to reduce pressure on the public food supply. As you look at all these Victory Garden posters here, start thinking about how you're going to grow your own gardens, because you're going to need a garden to survive when the hard times hit. And they probably have started right now with the food shortages and the supply chain problems. Your survival will depend upon your garden. Here's another poster from back then, and it says, don't tell. And today's preppers need to take this to heart. Don't tell people that you have a food supply or storing anything or stocking up on anything. This next one is kind of interesting. It's called veneer chicken. And the economic crisis of the Great Depression led many in the food industry to employ deceptive packaging to mislead consumers searching for bargains. Doesn't that sound familiar? What we have now is kind of like shrinkflation, where you think you're getting a package that's 16 ounces and they've reduced it to 14 or 13 and a half ounces. Now, the product pictured here used a deceptive packaging scheme that was typical of many that defrauded customers. Since white meat chicken is more expensive than dark meat, the white meat was placed in a veneer pattern across the back of the jar, while the label would cover up the dark meat inside. So you can see us doing things like that now. So let's talk a little bit about inflation. Look at this gas price, 29.9 cents. Here's one, 59.9 cents. Now it's well over $3.50 a gallon, some places almost $5 a gallon. Let's look at oranges here. Oranges were a penny, grapefruits 5 cents. This was the price of food in 1942. So think how much food has gone up. And it's not that the grapefruit has changed or the orange has changed, it's that the dollar has gone down in value. Here's soup, 12 cents a can. Wouldn't you love to find Campbell's soup for 12 cents a can? A time's going to come when a gallon of gas will be all you can afford, and food will be so expensive only the rich are going to be able to buy it. I think that's the way in Venezuela now. They do have a lot of food, but it's so expensive the average person can't buy it. Then I put in these pictures that were from 1974 when we had the gas shortage. And here's one that has a sign, the day's allocation of gas is sold out. Somebody on a bicycle using an alternative method of transportation. And then people tried to steal gas. You will start seeing this if you haven't seen it already. So the country's fuel shortage back then led to problems for motorists in finding gas because there were gas lines and you could only buy gas on odd and even days, as well as paying much more for it back then, and it resulted in thefts from cars unprotected. This father and son made a warning sign to thieves of what would happen if they stole their gas. The Great Reset is telling us to get ready to buy less and have less. Now here's one in 1917, that was World War I. Eat more cottage cheese, you'll need less meat. Well, back then, they wanted you to eat less meat so they could provide the troops with meat. But now they're trying to get rid of meat. They're pushing us to eat fake meat, and they want to get rid of cattle and pigs and just about every type of meat. And here's one, little Americans, do your bit. Eat oatmeal, cornmeal mush, hominy, and other corn cereals, and rice with milk. Save the wheat for our soldiers. Leave nothing on your plate. This is in 1918. It's probably we don't have wheat for soldiers right now, but leave little on your plate because it's going to be hard to find anything. Here's one, save the products of the land, eat more fish, they feed themselves. This again was during World War I in 1917. And here's one on how they wanted you to stop eating sugar. They told you not to use it on fruit, in desserts, on cereal, in coffee and tea, use less in preserving, less in cake and candy. Again, 1917. Here's one, sure we'll share the meat, kind of hard to read. It's how we're going to share it with the soldiers in World War II. Canning was the way to store food back then, and it still is. Excess food grown in victory gardens was canned and used during the winter months to help supplement the amount of food available. And that's what we're going to have to do. Here's a picture of a woman blanching tomatoes in 1921, one that exhibits her canned food in 1946. Here's a poster that says, use leftovers, the mark of a good cook. Here's one that shows sugar, flour, cereal, and spice and canned goods, and it promoted stocking up. And preppers today are canning and dehydrating and finding ways to stretch our preps and stocking up. And of course, the war wouldn't be complete without the ration cards. Rationing of scarce grocery staples like meat, sugar, and coffee during the war guaranteed that everyone would have equal access to the necessities. The Office of Price Administration. Wow, doesn't that sound awful? The Office of Price Administration, can't you see that happening today? Produced posters like rationing means a fair share. This one to remind people of the fairness of rationing. You ever believe rationing would be fair? There'll be a black market started in a minute. During the war, food was rationed because the troops had to be fed, and most of the ships that carried goods were used for war supplies. People received ration books, which had coupons for certain items like sugar, coffee, butter, meats, and canned goods. The coupons allowed you to buy the item in the store, even if you had the money. If you did not have the coupon, you could not buy that food. But I bet you there was a big black market in it. There just weren't enough supplies, so everything had to be rationed. And you can see that happening today. I mean, it's not far. Besides food, clothing and gas were rationed. Because of gas and rubber shortages, Americans were forced to do less driving. Because today's shortage of durable goods is similar. Today, instead of redirecting resources to support a war effort, manufacturing capabilities were shut down due to COVID, supply chain shortages, and people working and people just not wanting to work. And here's the picture of one boy gets his first experience using a war ration book. With many parents engaged in war work, children are being taught the facts of point rationing for helping out in family marketing. Doesn't that sound like today children are being taught? What are they being taught in school? Not what we were taught when we were younger. Here's a customer can use the ration books of the whole family, but the first thing she'll want to know when she buys pork chops, a pound of butter, or half a pound of cheese is how many points will it take? This was during World War II. I would expect if things get worse, you can expect rationing. Now today we only have signs in the stores, limit 2 per customer, but the government can step in at any time and demand rationing, or even worse, not let some people into the stores because of you-know-what. Here's a picture of shoes, get 'em fixed in time shoes, 1941. They were encouraged to take care of and repair shoes. With the shortages now, we're going to have to repair our shoes, our clothing, and our equipment. Here's a good one. Use it up, wear it out, make it do, or do without it. Kind of a nice little song. Use it up, wear it out, make it do, or do without it. It's a popular phrase that became famous during World War I, made popular again during the Great Depression, and then again during World War II. And I guess we can make it popular again now. It encouraged Americans to make do with shortages and rationing from the war. During these 3 periods of history, Americans embraced the victory garden and raised whatever food they could. There was no money for items such as shoes or clothing, and they were in short supply even if you had the money. So everything was used until it couldn't be used anymore. People darned their socks, and I can remember my mother darning her socks. Aluminum foil was cleaned and saved for reuse. Bill does that today. Worn-out soles on shoes were replaced with pieces of leather or cut from old tires. Will it be necessary for us to do that? Even now, we're not able to get new things because of the supply chain problems. We will have to learn how to sew, grow food, and repair everyday items. And back during the Depression, an Agricultural Adjustment Administration. Get that name again, Agricultural Adjustment Administration. Can't you see them using that today? They tried to boost the wholesale price of agricultural produce through an artificial scarcity initiative. Get that? An artificial scarcity initiative, in which crops were plowed up or left to rot, and 6 million pigs were killed and discarded. Well, today they've paid farmers to plow their crops under, to cull their livestock, the same type of thing as they did back in 1933. The public outcry over this waste of resources led in October 1933 the establishment of the Federal Surplus Relief Corporation, which aimed to divert commodities such as apples, beans, canned beef, and cotton to local relief organizations. And they would distribute commodities. Here's a picture from 1939. And here's a picture of trucks outside a starch factory in Caribou, Worcester County, Maine. There were almost 50 trucks in line. Some had been waiting for 24 hours for the potatoes to be graded and weighed. Doesn't this sound like the cargo ships waiting to be unloaded and to come into port, and the trucks waiting 8 hours or more to load up on these containers? Scrapping was one way in which all Americans could feel patriotic. They collected materials needed for the war effort. Rubber, metal, and paper were some of the highest priorities. Kids would organize metal drives in their neighborhood. They would collect old toys, old pots and pans, and even bottle caps off the street in order to make a small difference in the war effort. Paper was scarce, too. Students would go door to door collecting scrap paper. They felt it was their patriotic duty. The most pressing need from the beginning of the war was scrap metal. Salvaged iron and steel were essential for steel production. Only a 5 or 6 week supply was on hand when the Japanese struck Pearl Harbor, largely because the United States had sold to Japan a total of 200 million tons of scrap between 1935 and 1940. We had only a 5 or 6 week supply of scrap metal on hand when the Japanese struck Pearl Harbor. So don't you think that's just pretty similar to what we're doing today? We've outsourced almost everything today. All of our chips, not potato chips, our computer chips, and almost everything is made in China or Taiwan or someplace overseas. Here's a picture of the Great Depression where a junk dealer was on the street selling his goods. He probably took dollars for his goods, but when we get into trouble today, we're not going to take dollars. We're going to be bartering all those goods. The Great Depression was so severe that millions of people lost their jobs, and without jobs, people lost their home. So it came of no surprise that many shanty towns were made of cardboard boxes and other items. These shanty towns were made by homeless people and were known as Hooverville because of the president at the time was Herbert Hoover, and he was blamed for the Depression. But we see that today in many of our formerly great cities, all of the homeless people. Here's 5-cent apples. Men would buy apples from the apple industry for a reduced price, sell them at a profit. These were unemployed men. Here's something very interesting to note. Because of the stressful period caused by the Great Depression, many gangsters emerged. Some of them were well known, even today. Babyface Nelson, Pretty Boy Floyd, John Dillinger, Al Capone, Machine Gun Kelly, and let's not forget the women, Bonnie and Clyde and Ma Barker. This was a time of rising crime. And does that sound familiar? Look at all the looting and the rioting and the crime rate. Our crime rate is up now. If things get really bad, gangs will be scavenging and stealing. It really is eerie when you look at it, the way the past is being repeated right now. So take stock of what happened then and how these people survived, because they were probably your grandparents or even your parents. Granted, a war was going on and there was a depression, but they could be coming here. We're going to have to get through it when there isn't a war. So take stock of what happened and how they survived and what you can do to survive the coming hard times. I feel we're running out of time. It seems like things are getting bad really fast. And of course, please subscribe, like the video, and leave any comment that might help us to prepare for what is coming. Remember, it's not too late. Start prepping now. And thank you, and please subscribe.